This narration accompanies the metric system conversions PowerPoint slides that are available on Blackboard. And this lecture is designed as a review for how to convert in the metric system. It's definitely a skill you will want to have. And you'll need to use this skill in Lab 1 and also in most of the labs that we do. All right, so let's talk about why conversions are important. Why do you need to be able to do this? Well, this first slide presents an example of the importance of being able to do metric system conversions. For instance, let's say that you are working in a medical facility and you are asked to administer 20 mils of medicine of some kind to a patient. The medication is available in 1-liter bottles, but the equipment that you have available to administer this medication only measures in microliters. So what do? Well, you're going to need to be able to convert between liters and milliliters and microliters. If you do this incorrectly, if you're off by even 1 decimal point, you're going to either give your patient 10 times too much medication or 2 times too little. And either of those scenarios can be fatal. So you need to be able to convert between these units and do so accurately and effectively. So let's talk about how metric system conversions work. They're really pretty simple. You just have to practice it a little bit. In this lecture, I'm going to show you 2 different methods for metric system conversions, and I'm going to start with the good old ladder that we talked about in the metric system introduction. So hopefully you have a printout of this ladder. Hopefully you memorized it or began that process. We're now going to use this ladder to make our metric system conversions. Okay? So as we discussed in the last lecture, each of the steps on this ladder represents a prefix within the metric system, such as kilo or deci. And these prefixes represent amounts. For instance, a kilo represents 1,000 of a unit, so kilogram would be 1,000 grams. And as you can see on the ladder, these prefixes are separated by a factor of 10 for most of them, with the exception of the jump from milli down to micro and from micro down to nano. Now, since each of the steps in this ladder represent a factor of 10, moving from one step to another on this ladder is equivalent to moving your decimal point from one place to the next. So one movement of the decimal point is the same as one movement on this ladder. So keep that in mind as we use this method. All right, this slide is just there to remind you not to forget those blank steps between milli and micro and nano. If you forget those steps are there, you're not going to convert correctly. You're not going to move your decimal point the correct number of places. All right, so let's just start looking at this example, or let's start looking at this method using an example. So for instance, let's say that your book measures 100 centimeters in length and you want to know how many millimeters that is. So as it says at the bottom of the screen, 100 centimeters equals how many millimeters? Now, if you can do this in your head, that's fine, but I'm going to show you how we would solve this problem using the good old ladder. Okay. So here we have part of the ladder on the bottom of the screen, and the first thing you want to do with your ladder is you want to identify what you have. So figure out which step you're on for the known quantity. In this case, we know we have 100 centimeters. So we're going to start on the centimeter step. Okay? That's this step right here. I'm circling it there. Now we want to convert to millimeters. So milli, you'll notice, is the next step down on the ladder. So it's this step right here. There's one step between them. And you can also identify that you are going from a larger unit to a smaller unit, meaning you're moving to the right. Okay. What do we do with that information? Well, it turns out that the movements you're going to do with your decimal point mirror the movements on the ladder. So if we go back, if you see that to convert from centi to milli, you move one step to the right, going down the ladder, you're going to move your decimal point exactly that way. Okay, looking at the bottom here we have our 100 centimeters equals how many millimeters? And here I've written out the 100 centimeters. And of course, you know that the decimal place would go after the 100. The decimal point, rather. All right, so how are we going to move it? Well, we're going to move that decimal one place to the right, exactly the same way that we moved on the ladder. And when you do that, you get the number 1,000. So to solve the problem, 100 centimeters equals 1,000 millimeters. Okay, very easy. Now, sometimes it's necessary to put your numbers in scientific notation. If the number is especially large or has a lot of zeros or is very complicated, sometimes it's easier to put that in scientific notation. In this case, it's not particularly necessary, but that's something that you can do if the number's really messy. All right, put a second example in there just to show you. I actually want to skip over to example number 3 here, because this example is going to use one of those weird units, micrometers. Okay. So in this example, we've got 1 micrometer, and we want to know how many centimeters that is. Well, we can solve this problem using the ladder exactly as we did before. So let's look at the portion of the ladder that applies. Down here at the bottom, here we have micro. That's the step we're going to start on. And we want to get it into centi. So centi's way up here. So what you have to do to convert from micro to centi is you have to take 1, 2, 3, 4 steps to the left. And it's to the left because we are traveling from a smaller prefix up to a larger prefix. So 1, 2, 3, 4 steps to the left. We make that exact same movement with our decimal point. Here you can see that decimal goes with that number 4 there. Our decimal point would go right after the number 1 here. So to convert it, we're going to move it 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to add 3 zeros to it. And so that tells us that 1 micrometer is equal to 0.0001 centimeters. And again, if we wanted to, we could express that in scientific notation, 1 times 10 to the negative 4 centimeters. Okay, so the reason that I like the ladder method so much is that once you've memorized the ladder, you really can move pretty easily through the metric system by just remembering the order in which the prefixes fall. All right, now it's time for you to try this method yourself. What I recommend at this point is that you pause the video and try these problems. And then once you've got your answers, then you can flip to the next slide and I'll show you what the correct answers are. All right, so please take a moment, pause the video, and give these a try. Okay, hopefully you paused it and tried it yourself first. Here are the correct answers. The top problem, 3.54 grams equals how many kilograms? Okay, well, there are 3 steps between grams and kilograms. So to complete this, you needed to move the decimal place 3 places to the left. And so the correct answer is, as shown here, 0.00354 kilograms. And that can also be expressed in scientific notation. Okay. On the second problem, we're going from a larger unit, centimeters, down to a very, very small unit, nanometers. So let's see. From centimeters to millimeters. Let me show you on the ladder. That's just easier. Let's go back to that big ladder. There it is. All right. Centimeters all the way down to nanometers. To get from centimeters to millimeters, it's 1 step to the right. And then from millimeters down to micro is 1, 2, 3. From micro down to nano is an additional 1, 2, 3. So we've got 3, 6, 7 steps to the right to get from centi down to nano. You can see that that's what's been done here. We needed to move this decimal point 7 places to the right. So we moved it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that gives us this really big number, which can also be expressed in scientific notation. All right, so that was the ladder method. That's the tried and true method. If you are very mathematically nimble, you might be able to just use conversion factors and mentally jump from one unit to another. But if you are not particularly mathematically nimble, or if you find this method easier, this method is really great. It's the tried and true method. You can always go back to your ladder and move around. Okay. Now there is a second method for converting between metric units that I want to show you. It sounds a little bit intimidating. It's called dimensional analysis, but really it's pretty simple. Dimensional analysis uses fractions, a series of fractions, to convert from one unit to the next. And this is also very useful in chemistry if you happen to take a chemistry class. So let's jump right into it. Let's say that this is our example problem here. 2 milligrams, and we want to know how many grams that is. Right. Well, as I mentioned, dimensional analysis uses a series of fractions to do these conversions. So the first fraction we're going to set up in this problem is going to use what we know. So what do we know? Well, we know that we have 2 milligrams. And in order to make that into a fraction, we're going to set our 2 milligrams over the number 1. In the second step, we're going to multiply the fraction we just made times a second fraction. And that second fraction is going to represent a conversion factor. So in the second fraction, we're going to jump from one unit to another unit. Okay. Now there's some rules about how to set up your second fraction. Whatever unit you use in the numerator of your first fraction, you want to make sure that that unit is also in the denominator of the second fraction. Now, why is that? Well, the reason is that we're trying to get out of this original unit and into a different unit. So if you put it in the numerator of the first and the denominator of the second, when you multiply these two fractions together, those two units will cancel out. They'll disappear. And then whatever unit is left in your fractions, that's the unit you'll end up in. So we've got our 2 milligrams over 1 here, and we know we're going to have milligrams on the bottom of the second fraction. Okay. Now the next thing to think about with your second fraction is what unit you want to go to. In this case, we wanted to go to grams. So we know that grams is going to be our unit on the numerator of the second fraction. So grams over milligrams, okay, because we want to go from milligrams to grams. Now, how did I get these numbers in front of the units? Well, I have to think about what I know about the relationship between grams and milligrams. And I just happen to know that there are 1,000 milligrams in 1 gram. So that's why I chose these numbers to put in this second fraction. Okay. Now my fractions are all set up. Now what do I do with them? Well, to solve this problem, what I'm going to need to do is multiply the two numerators together. I'm going to multiply the two denominators together, and then I'm going to divide the numerator by the denominator. So in this case, it's 2 times 1 divided by 1 times 1,000. In other words, it's 2 divided by 1,000. Okay. You notice that the milligrams cancel out when I do this. So I am going to end up in grams, which is exactly what I want. So when I multiply this out, end up with this answer. 2 milligrams is equal to 0.002 grams. All right, it's your turn again. I'd like you to pause the video, please. Try to work this problem out, and then restart the video, and you can check your answer on the next slide. So please pause now. Okay, let's take a look at the answer. All right, there's several different ways to do this problem. here is how I set it up. I've got 0.4033 kilometers, and I want to know how many centimeters that is. It's going to be a lot of centimeters. So using dimensional analysis, what I did was I put my known quantity, this 0.4033 kilometers, over 1. In my second fraction, I knew I wanted to have kilometers in the denominator. Okay, so I start with that. Now, I'm thinking about kilometers and centimeters and how they relate to one another, and I don't really know how many centimeters are in a kilometer, or vice versa. But what I do know is that there are 1,000 meters in 1 kilometer. So in the second fraction, what I'm going to do is jump from kilometers to meters, and then I can work on getting closer to centimeters. So I have 1 kilometer is equal to 1,000 meters. Now I'm going to add a third fraction. In my third fraction, since meters are up here in the numerator of my second fraction, I know I'm going to have meters in the denominator of the third, so they cancel out. And now I can think about the relationship between meters and centimeters. And I do know something about that. I know that there are 100 centimeters in 1 meter. So I can put 100 centimeters over a meter. At this point, I'm going to go back and make sure that my units are going to cancel out, and they do, so that I am left with centimeters. And that should get me the number that I want. Now I can multiply the 0.4033 times 1,000 times 100 divided by 1 times 1 times 1, which is 1. Okay. And that gives me 40,330 centimeters. Okay. Now, dimensional analysis is handy not only for converting from metric units to other metric units, but it's also really handy for converting between metric and English. Okay, so let me show you an example of that. Let's say we've got 42 pounds of sugar, we'll say, and we want to know how many grams that is. So we're jumping from English pounds to metric grams. How do we figure that out? Well, always you're going to start with what you know. I've got 42 pounds. I'm putting that over 1. Now I'm going to multiply this times a second fraction, and my second fraction is going to be my conversion factor. So since I've got pounds in the numerator of the first fraction, I know I'm going to have pounds in the denominator of my second fraction. I want to jump from pounds to kilograms, or what I want to do is jump from pounds to grams, but I really don't know anything about how many grams are in a pound. But what I do know is how kilograms and pounds relate. So I'm going to put pounds in the denominator and kilograms in the numerator of the second fraction. And I just happen to know that 2.2 pounds is equal to 1 kilogram. Now, how did I know that 2.2? Well, those conversion factors, unfortunately, you either have to know or have memorized, or just look up in a book or, on the internet. And that's just fine if you have to do that. Okay, but I've got my 2.2 pounds and my 1 kilogram. Now I need to get from kilograms to grams, and that part's pretty easy. I'm going to add this third fraction here. In this fraction, I'm going to have kilograms in the denominator because it was in the numerator of the previous fraction. And I know that there are 1,000 grams in a kilogram, and grams is the unit that I want. So I say 1,000 grams over 1 kilogram. Now all I have to do, as before, is multiply the top, multiply the bottom, divide the top by the bottom, and that will give me my answer. Double checking that my units cancel each other out, except for the unit that I want, which is grams, and it does. So that gives us this answer. 42 pounds of sugar is equivalent to 19,050.9 grams of sugar. All right, I'd like you to practice this skill of converting from English to metric and vice versa. So this is where you will pause the video, give this problem a try, and then check your answers in a moment. Okay, so go ahead and pause. Okay, let's check your answer. So you made some measurements of your desk, and you figured out that your desk is 580 centimeters in length. That's a pretty big desk. And you want to know how long this is in inches. Pretty simple to do. All right. As always, you'll start with your 580 over 1. That's your known quantity. That's centimeters. The second fraction is going to be a conversion factor. So you're going to have centimeters in the denominator. And you know you want to go to inches, so it's going to be in the numerator in this case. Now you do know something about centimeters and inches and how they relate. A quick check will tell you that there are 2.54 centimeters in an inch. So that's why I've set it up that way. And if you do the multiplying and dividing, you find out that 580 centimeters is equivalent to 228.34 inches in the English system. Okay, so hopefully you got that answer. Congratulations if you did. All right, so there are actually many other methods for making conversions in the metric system. The two that I have shown you are the most commonly used, and I think they're the most straightforward methods. Again, if you are not particularly mathematically nimble, these two methods should work really well for you because they're very methodical. There's a series of steps you go through. If you are mathematically nimble, you might like to use this third method, and probably you do this in your head. But this is multiplication and division method, and I'll just briefly describe it. But basically, as it says there, that if you're going from a larger unit to a smaller unit, you're multiplying by a certain conversion factor. And if you're going from smaller to larger, you're going to be dividing by a particular conversion factor. So if you happen to know how many micros are in a milli or how many millis are in a kilo, you can multiply or divide depending on which direction you're going, and you can do this conversion pretty quickly. I don't recommend that you do this unless you are very familiar with the metric system and have practiced it a lot. And it's always a good idea to double check your conversions with the ladder, just to make sure you've moved that decimal the correct number of places. Okay, but you can read through this slide. There's another slide here that gives you some examples for multiplication and division. All right, so hopefully you found this lecture helpful. It should be a good review of metric system conversions, of that ladder method, and of dimensional analysis. And so now what you can do is you can go to your pre-lab for Lab 1. And actually, this is going to be helpful if you go to Part B of your lab, page 2. You should now have all the skills and all the information that you need to complete this page of the pre-lab. If you have any questions or need any help, let me know. Remember to check out your resources on Blackboard if you want more practice or more help. Please do that. And as always, contact me with any questions. Okay, thank you very much.